I don't think that this is, I agree with Abu Zaid, who says in the film, this is not an unsolvable problem. What we have is a lack of will, and much of that is architected through lack of political leadership, in my view. And that was why we wanted to look globally and not just at Australia, and I think we also wanted to put Australia into a context.
Further to that context, I mean, the figure that came out recently from the UNHCR, and it's not a particularly new one, but 85% of the world's refugees are hosted by developing countries, and it's usually countries neighbouring those from where people have fled. Is that something that's not well understood, and how does one go about, I suppose, changing people's understanding?
Well, you know, I think we have a clip in the film with Theresa May saying, you know, quite, you know, appallingly, that, you know, her concern is really for keeping those people in their place, and it's not a concern for their safety in the same way that our, you know, we can't have boat people here because they might drown on the way. These are cynical attitudes from countries in the West to, I mean, I think those relocations are perfectly possible. You look at Jordan, the burden on Jordan is enormous. I mean, it's an incredibly huge burden that country is taking on, and you can see that there will be limits to it. You know, they can't actually do it. 193 countries went to the UN, you know, and basically nothing happened out of that. They went there, they wrote plenary papers for maybe 2 years. They said that they were going there and they would agree, they were going to write a commitment to take 1 million people and share it across the world, and nothing has happened.
Deng, you came to this country in 1998. You came, I think, importantly, pre-Tampa. I'm just wondering, have you, in your time, seen a changing attitude towards asylum seekers and refugees in this country?
Oh, well, good evening, guys. How are you? Okay. Well, I don't want to say anything that is going to be a little bit controversial, but since...
we have Julian here for that.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I do have a child at the moment. My child will be Julian. When I first came here, I didn't know much about what's going on in Australia because I couldn't read and write. But after learning how to read and write, even better how to do research, I actually find that there's nothing has changed since Tampa. Learned Tampa, especially when I did my first law degree, my first undergraduate law degree. And I learned so much so far that our politicians are even becoming more dangerous than before. Nobody learned from John Howard that he was the #1 liar in the country. And then we'll put Turnbull in, and he's equally liar, you know. You can't simply turn our blind eyes on reality about human suffering. You can't. But people like me that complain about it, we are considered either mad or we are anti-democracy. Well, I say democracy is actually now the criminal that is committing a lot of genocides against people. That is, I think, democracy more dangerous in my view. We brought them in, and then they go and commit serious crime in our name. Therefore, we are complicit until we actually open our eyes and our mind. That is my view. So we are getting more dangerous. Trump is building wall. He will build it. He's a billionaire. What's wrong with it? Well, there's a lot of things that are wrong with it. But for me, what is the major problem is when you locked up a refugee, a person that was in prison already, and you lock them up again in this country, I think it's more wrong than anything else. So I'm not talking about human rights. Human rights have become almost everybody use it. I'm talking about the dignity of a human being. That is a subject that we all forgot. We all forgotten it. It's a human rights. Well, I don't agree with that. Don't agree with that. Rights, anyone can have rights. But to dignify the person, Australia has lost that. And we still have that with our indigenous people. So I don't even need to talk about international issues. I need to talk about our problem here. We haven't solved our problem. Thank you.
Julian, in the first scene in the film, you say we've been induced to tolerate the intolerable. One of the ways that this seems to have happened has been through the quite deliberate use and manipulation of language. We no longer have asylum seekers coming to this country by boat. We have illegals. We don't have an immigration department. We have an Australian border force. We have children being asked in offshore detention, what's your name? And they respond with their 6-character boat ID, GUW123. How important do you see that language as being in terms of sort of setting a foundation, a framework for the policies that followed?
It's been fundamental. It's not widely remembered that the judgment in the Tampa case was handed down by Justice North in Melbourne at 2:15 in the afternoon on the 11th of September 2001. And about 8 or 9 hours later, the attack on America happened. That's when John Howard started calling boat people illegal. And the fact that the whole exercise is called border protection has induced a large number of people who get their news from Fox or the Herald Sun or Daily Telegraph, whatever you have here. It's induced them to think that we are being protected from criminals, which would make sense if it was true, but it's just a lie. It's a lie perpetrated by the way, I don't think John Howard is the greatest liar. The worst of the liars was Scott Morrison. Because he claimed in his maiden speech in Parliament, he actually quoted his favourite passage from the Bible. He made a great deal about how Christian he is, and yet he is defying the most fundamental basis of Christian teaching. And he is the one who issued a directive that everyone in the department in the immigration department, should describe irregular maritime arrivals as illegal maritime arrivals. You know, it's so dishonest, it's almost beyond belief. And there's another thing that we need to remember in this. I only sort of noticed the clip from Theresa May is saying, you know, in connection with Brexit, that they will make it easier to deport refugees who are suspected terrorists. Now, there was, round about that time, the English Parliament passed an act which said that if a person is a refugee, and brackets, can't be removed from the country, and if they are a suspected terrorist, but we haven't got enough evidence to prosecute them, they could be put in detention for up to 12 months. Only 12 months. And that was said to preserve the life of the nation, which is the get-out clause in the Human Rights Act. The Human Rights Act, which reflects the European Charter of Human Rights, and which membership of the EU makes compulsory. So naturally the question went to the House of Lords, is this valid legislation or not? Because in the ordinary way of things, locking up innocent people for 12 months would be a breach of the Human Rights Act. But the preserve the life of the nation get out is what they relied on. 8-1, the House of Lords said, no, this is not valid. And Lord Hoffman finished his speech by saying, the life of the nation is less threatened by terrorism than by laws like these. Now that gives you a very clear understanding of how seriously it is seen from other countries, the country from which we took our origins, how seriously it is seen that you will lock up innocent people for even as much as 12 months. Well, the people on Manus and Nauru right now have been there for 5 years with no prospect of ever getting anywhere else. More people have died in detention on Manus and Nauru than have been resettled in other countries. It's a scandal. And I have to say that this film, which I think has been superbly put together, this film, and which, by the way, I was not scripted at all. So what I was saying is my views, not, well, I think Judy agrees with me more or less. I wasn't told what to say, and I wasn't told that I couldn't say things. this film shows, I think, very clearly how badly we are doing in this country. Consider that we use Nauru as a dumping ground for refugees, men, women and children. There are children, refugees on Nauru who were born there. They've never been out of detention all their lives. They're regarded by our legislation as boat people, even though they were born on Nauru. Now, Nauru is a dumping ground that Australia chose as a result of the Tampa episode, and Nauru's area is smaller than Tullamarine Airport in Melbourne. I mean, that's insane. And it costs ludicrous amounts of money, but that's just a practical argument.
Deng, as someone who's, I suppose, enjoyed the protections of the Refugees Convention, and you were resettled from a camp in Africa, and it's a fact that about less than, or fewer than sort of 1% of the world's refugees are ever able to find resettlement through those processes. But how do you feel about that change in language, and how does that make you feel when you hear talk about illegals, about queue jumpers, and about the illegitimacy of people coming seeking protection?
I think in 2011 or 2012, I responded to the question of queue jumpers. And I did tell Peter Reddix that it is imaginary. You know, if you're running away from a bullet, seriously, do you see a queue? See your life? But what I didn't tell Peter Reddix is this: the bullet that I was running away from was not made in my country. It was made by somebody. And if you look at Syria, it's the same thing that is destroying Syria. Is most of these weapons that destroy Syria, they were not made in Syria. This is why do we do double dipping? We encourage crime over there, and then over here, we don't accept our responsibilities. Are you not responsible for what happened to me, to the man that wanted to shot me? It's simply people are running away from responsibilities, and these are politicians. And Julian put it quite clearly before. If you want to be represented by somebody, a politician, well, ask that person what exactly they're going to deliver, what they're going to do, what they did for you. Are they going to stand up for you or not? Nobody's stand up for us, all of us, the ones that are sitting here. None of them, none of those politicians are standing up for us. They're only there because they lie to us. Time to get rid of them. I think that's when the democracy becomes more useful. You can't keep the same people for the last 20, 10 years, generation after generation, and you think they're going to do the right thing? No. Australia have to change, and this is the powerhouse. We're human, and for me, I'm not less a human. And you see that echo went through, even though I've been in this country for 20 years. I'm Australian. But to reduce my dignity because of my skin color is simply not acceptable for many of you here will not accept it as people that actually value me. Australia is going through the direction of trying to reduce human value. Locking you up in a prison in Australia is a criteria for you being deported, criminal record. And it's deliberate. It's quite intentional. And for me, that's why I said is, if you want to deport them, you Sudanese are being branded as having a criminal record, well, deport them back, and I'm happy to be deported back to South Sudan. Seriously. Because if I swear my allegiance to Australia, I need to be protected too. But where is my protection? As a person, as a Sudanese of a color. My problem is simple. Australia need to move forward. Get rid of the politician. The law that is just have to come from us as people. It doesn't come from people that were educated in Oxford. It can be from Western Sydney and Blacktown that knows, well, this is real life. This is humanity. Simply don't let our people, our politicians, our leaders mislead us. We can't just put them there. We have to go for the champions. A champion like him, I'll follow him I don't care. If I make a mistake on the road, I will say, Julian made a mistake. Follow somebody to do the right thing. Don't follow wrong doers. That's the only thing that we can say.
Julian and Judy, you've both sort of worked in this area for a long time. Making this film, was there anything that surprised you?
After I think about it. I think I was surprised to see the trend in other countries towards the sort of harsh, dishonest policies that Australia is adopting, although it hasn't gone as far as we have. Since Trump became president, things have deteriorated there, and it's very interesting. Remember that famous first conversation that Turnbull had with Trump? During that conversation, Turnbull was trying to persuade Trump to take the people held on manus, because the ones who've been accepted as refugees aren't going anywhere. They're not even allowed to travel the full extent of PNG, let alone go to other countries, and the locals are very hostile to them. But Trump said to Turnbull, look, you don't expect us to take criminals. And Turnbull said to him, they're not criminals. And Trump said, well, why not let them, why not release them? Well, that's a really good question, actually. But now, look what's happened recently. Now he's going to soften his directive, and instead of separating children from their parents at the border, and these are not Mexicans, these are people from Guatemala and so on, instead of separating the children from their parents, he's now going to let them all go into detention together. Now, and this is all as a deterrent, and it's explicit. And Peter Dutton, by the way, is probably the worst of the lot. Peter Dutton, remember, see how things degrade. Just a couple of weeks ago, Peter Dutton said that all the work of the last few years would be undone if we show one act of compassion. Now, how many people in this room would have thought that any Australian parliamentarian, let alone the most powerful politician in the country, would be able to argue against being compassionate? You know, we really need to notice that we're on a very dangerous slope, and we're going into very dark places already.
Judy, what surprised you?
I'm sure that, well, actually, one of the things that's actually not in the film that astounded me was the investigation of No Advantage, instituted by the Labour Party for people on Nauru, and I expect that everybody probably knows that. But the fact that we actually sent teams of people from our immigration department to look at the circumstances that people were waiting in Indonesia and recreate them on Nauru so that they perceived that there was no advantage to them coming to Australia. I just think it's like a whole bunch of people gone crazy, frankly.
Now, we asked for questions from the audience, and a few themes sort of emerged over and over again, and one of those in particular was, what can we do? This seemed to be a sort of a cry from lots of people. Judy, do you have ideas?
It's difficult. I mean, when you have a bipartisan agreement from both parties to almost out-engineer each other in cruelty, you don't know what to do. But I mean, my view is you need to turn up the volume. I mean, we all need to start doing more things than we're doing, because whatever we're doing isn't working, and the circumstance is not getting any better, and it's going to get much worse, it seems to me. I mean, Dutton's ambitions seem to be, I mean, like Julian, I can't believe a Minister of the Crown suggesting that compassion is too risky a feeling for the hard work that he's done. What is he talking about? What is the hard work?
What's the Burnside Challenge?
Well, the Burnside Challenge was actually originated by Judy Rymer. It is to write a very simple letter to Peter Dutton, asking, in essence, are both people illegal? What offence do they commit? And what are we actually doing to them? Try and flush the truth out of these people. Now, the idea of writing to parliamentarians, and I would not limit it to Dutton, I would say write to your local member, write to other federal MPs, and ask them simple questions, like the classic would be, Dear X, I'm a voter in your electorate. Do you believe asylum seekers are, quote unquote, illegal? If yes, what offence do they commit? Yours faithfully. Now, it's very hard to hide from that because your answers will be obvious and your failure to answer will be equally obvious. A number of people have done that and they get back 2.5 pages of refugee policy written by a staffer that does not answer the questions. And in that case, what you do, and here's more of the challenge, write back saying, "Dear so-and-so, thank you for your letter. I'm still a voter in your electorate. You sent me 2.5 pages. I didn't answer the question. Here are the questions again. A, B, yours faithfully." And repeat as often as necessary. You may never get honest answers from them, and if you don't, kick them out. Don't vote for them.
In terms of the public conversation, and this is a question to the panel, I mean, the people who are prepared to give up their Monday night to come and watch a film called Border Politics are a group who I suspect is already engaged with this issue. How do you broaden the conversation? How do we talk to other people who aren't already thinking about this issue?
Well, somebody asked me in one of the Q&As that we've done earlier why I made the film, and my answer was that I made it for the neighbour of a very good friend of mine who I ended up having dinner with quite a lot. Pete has the most beautiful garden. He's a really wonderful father and a terrific man, and Pete and I argue about this subject all the time. I've asked Pete to actually find out some facts. He won't. So we had to have an embargo on the conversation because there was no point in talking to him because he wouldn't become informed. So I actually made the film for Pete. And we've all got Petes. So what I think you should all do is get all the Petes to come along and look at the film.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to thank Judy Rymer, Deng Adut, Julian Burnside. Thank you all very